Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another instructional episode from the Legal Beagle podcast. Today, we're talking about the language of art, and Brandon Sibley's going to lead us on the charge. Without further ado, here's Brandon.
Well, thank you, Gary. I'm glad to be back. It's funny how things progress over time. First off, if people have been with us long enough, we know that our original website name was Art Exposed. We knew there was something going on with the language. They were messing with the language using um, deflection, equivocation, false equivalencies, and things of that nature. It just didn't sound correct to us. However, we fundamentally lack the ability to articulate what was wrong, and that's because, like Hosea 4:6 says, "My people are destroyed from the Lord." And because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee. So the journey begins at letter A. You can't traverse all the way to Z. First, you got to unpack all the years of misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation. So the focus and primary purpose of this series is starting at the beginning. So we had to get a fundamental base level of what we are for, right? So, and I'll tell people out there now, you should have a metaphysics. You should have an ethics and a politics. You can't separate these things, right? These kind of go hand in hand.
And what do you mean by metaphysics?
Metaphysics is the basis of your so metaphysics and morality, right? So we'll talk. Do you have? Let me explain this. So your metaphysics can be based in like Freud, Foucault, or Nietzsche, or Jacques Derrida, Immanuel Kant, David Hume, all these people, right, that reject the natural world as not existing at all, and everything's in their head. It's perceptual wise, okay? But my metaphysics is based on the natural world. First and foremost, especially when we're dealing with law, folks. When we're dealing with law, I know people are going to say, well, Brandon, you said this before. My metaphysics on my religious practices are completely separate from my interactions with other people. Okay, you must differentiate that. And here's the issue: the real world exists. Okay, it's just not a figment of your imagination. Our five senses interact with reality in such a way that we smell a rose, and I'll give an example. We smell a rose. Our nerves take it in, right? And although we can imagine it later, it doesn't replace the fact that the rose is there. It produced the smell, and it produced what is called a sensation or an impression. Okay, and without your first interaction with the natural world, you could not imagine anything. Okay, let's just go there, folks. So this is why my philosophy is based on the natural world. And when you hear natural philosophy, we're going to learn a little bit about it today. That's the reason I harp on it so much, because it is based on individualism and the absolute rights of man. Okay, well, first off, we have to we last week discussed the rights of man, the individualism versus collectivism in all its different avenues. However, there's a natural language. If I point that way, right, you instinctively is going to look. That's a natural language, right? I don't have to say anything. And then there's an artificial language. An artificial language is what man creates and agrees upon in a civil society to say this word means that. So let's start at the top right here, Gary. And I put this in a Word document this time, guys. We're going to go down. We're going to get into the grammatical canons of interpretation and the golden rule, which is the plain and ordinary meaning. We're going to read some statutes today. Very easy statutes, okay? Not complicated. It's not the administrative statutes versus anything else. It's a civil right. And then we're going to do Title 26, 7701 of the IRS Code. So stick around. We're getting to the fundamentals and basics.
And saying that we've all agreed on the language is a bit of a stretch these days, but
well, that's right, because we've moved into the postmodern world. That's why. Because remember, all social engineering begins with manipulation of the language. All social engineering begins with the manipulation of a language.
And here we are, folks.
That All right, so language is an art form. We must agree with that first, okay? Natural language has priority over artificial language because we must have a system of natural signs in order to learn or develop a system of artificial signs. People will go back in history, and I've said always that words and the aleph and the A and the alpha and the B, these are all symbolic in representation already, right? It's already built into your letters, okay? Artificial signs must be invented and their meaning agreed among those who effectively use them to communicate. First and foremost, this is why we had great minds like Webster and other people spend so much time on etymology and this epistemology, going back and making sure they traced as best as possible and had these big debates about these issues that seem minuscule to most people, because we live in a time where we really don't study things. We just accept everything that's presented to us, and we go, oh, okay. And yet Webster's dictionary now, Merriam's dictionary now, can change the definition of a word every freaking year, and wonder why they're doing that.
And why do you think, as a society, we just accepting as they are? Is it because that we think everything's been explored and we can't
That's right.
come up with anything new?
Well, and we'll take this a modern education, right? We can go off to one of Tesla's best quotes, right? Where mathematicians, and he was talking about Einstein, by the way, chase their tails on chalkboards, think they're describing the world. However, the truth is that we are living in a world where theoretical assumptions and presumptions have ruled the public education center. And you're right, Gary. The first thing they tell you when you walk into the class is, we figured all this out.
Yeah, that's right. Don't you question me.
That's right. And the entire reason for the digital world is to cut you off from the natural world, right? And just people, you always know when summer comes around, I get a deep tan. You can't keep me from being outside. Okay. You just can't keep me from being, I want to be outside in some way, shape, fashion, or form. I just want to be outside. I might have my headphones in listening to a lecture from somebody, but I'm going to be outside 90% of the time if the sun is out. And there's a reason for that, because there's a calmness in nature if you just slow down and pay attention. But nonetheless, so Thomas Reid is a famous Scottish philosopher from the 1700s. He directly opposed David Hume's treatise of the human mind. And this is a quote from him. I just want everybody to know when I quote somebody. Thomas Reid argued that the primary function of language was not to make assertions, what Reid called expressing a judgment, a solitary act, but rather to perform the social acts of questioning, commanding, and promising. Sounds a whole lot like contractual terms, right? Okay. Human language's primary and direct purpose is to express. It's either expressed or implied. We got a lot of implications today. Those social operations of the mind. And I'll move on. The natural order of things can be observed, communicated, agreed upon, and ultimately defined in artificial languages such as Latin, French, Hebrew, English. And so I took it upon myself to show the pictorial Hebrew, the reason why they used animals, because it was directly correlated with their reality, right? It was the natural world. The Aleph, this animal, was the all-powerful and all-versatile animal of the Hebrews. The name of this letter is Aleph, which may be the origin of elephant, right? However, it had the E vowel pronunciation. If I'm remembering correctly there. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. I haven't studied pictorial Hebrew in probably 5 years. The A looks like a pyramid with the all-seeing eye on the top, right? And I've gone through all this stuff ad nauseum over the years because I was searching, and some of it's worthwhile information, some of it isn't. But that's the way acquiring knowledge is. to truly know a thing, you must test a thing. And what we're discussing today is the basic truth. And I'll say truth because it is truth. It's objectively proven that without you and I being able to, I'll give a perfect example. You and I are having a conversation, and I say woman, and you say woman, which includes trans women, right? We're on two totally different planes now. And it's something
Right.
so simple as this, right? I say women need their uh, separated spaces. Well, if the other person thinks that the designation of woman includes men who identify as women, we're on two totally planes, and there's no way that a dialogue can come back and forth that we're on the same well in the same atmosphere. Okay.
And there's a term for that that I cannot recall, and I've looked for again and again. I can't find it again. But when two people are conversing in the same language but have different dictionaries, there's
Yeah.
a term for that, and I cannot recall for the life of me. And I've looked for it, and I can't find it. If anyone knows, put it in the description, please.
Yes, please, because we like to add words to our vocabulary. And a great quote, and I can't remember who it is. The limitation of our language is the limitation of our. Okay, and that's a truth. Okay, if you can't think it, it's over with. That's it. So it's the limitation. So somebody with a third grade reading level is limited, and we'll always juxtapose this back on reality. There is a reason why classical liberalism, grammar, rhetoric, and logic has been removed from the education system, because the point is not to educate the children in objective reality. It is to create social activists. And in each and every one of your countries, no matter where you're watching this at, they are creating the Red Guard, Mao's Red Guard cultural revolution, where they can bypass the cognitive abilities of these people and direct them through their passions, their wishes, and their fear and emotions. Okay, because they're in their animalistic brain, they're in the reptile brain. They've never they're in a constant state of suspended adolescence, and this goes for the intelligentsia too, folks.
Right,
Okay.
and so they develop stimuli in the 3D world that shoves your spirit down into the lower chakras, that keeps you in your animalistic instinct of fight or flight, and you never gain enough energy to grow the upper chakras.
That's right. That's right. So classical liberalism, we must. I'm going to give one historical pattern here from the 1912s, 20s, how progressives morphed into liberals, and then morphed back to progressives in the 1990s. And the reason for that is once the name got a negative connotation, all they did was switch it. Okay. And when you call somebody a liberal, when they're not liberal in any sense of the imagination, it's a misuse of language. And there is no group on the earth that is more non-liberal than the left wing of the United States. They are not liberals. They are progressives. Okay. So classical liberalism, it was a political philosophical doctrine which holds that the central problem of politics is the protection of individual freedom or liberty. We have Roosevelt here, the emergence of a political party, and it was the Progressive Party, a third party formed to further Theodore Roosevelt's ideals of greater state power and combating large corporate interests. What they didn't say, that the large corporate interests were going to merge with the government in a fascist state, and now it was going to be government subsidized instead of corporate, right? Corporatized, and that's a corporatocracy, which is fascism. And we'll just go through a quick historical lesson here from Roosevelt to FDR. 1932, FDR had proclaimed every man has a right to life, and this means that he has also a right to make a comfortable living. Well, that sounds great. That is wonderful. except we have created a right where there wasn't one. Okay. The man who doesn't go out and work and earn his living, well, guess what? What if the man is comfortable living in a wooden shack? Well, we can't compel him to work. Okay. It sounds good, but what this is false philanthropy, altruistic collectivism. And there's always a cost.
And
Okay.
how would that relate to populism?
Well, so populism. I've yet to see a true populist candidate be elected. Okay,
Huey
'Cause
Long?
huh?
Huey Long?
Well, Huey Long in Louisiana may be a good, but I'd have to study real deeply on him. The only populist that I've ever witnessed in the United States is Vivek. That's a true populist that would go in and destroy the administrative state. Now, whether he would have done it or not, I don't know. All I heard was wanting to take an axe to the administrative state. That's what I want to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, that's music to my ears.
Yeah. So no longer would freedom be defined simply as protection from or against the abusive powers of government. See, it's the carrot and the stick, right? We've got caught, but we want to make these programs. We want to make Americans more successful. And what most people don't know is that the Depression was caused on purpose. So everything goes through crisis,
Our
reaction.
government wouldn't do that.
Oh, yes, they did. As a matter of fact, the Federal Reserve did it themselves because the government wasn't in control with the monetary policy.
Yeah.
But for 20 or 30 years, Herbert Hoover, who was a staunch conservative, don't hoover yourself, right? Because that was the statement against Republicans for the foreseeable future. It was Democrats because they got the blame for the collapse of the monetary system. But the truth is that the Federal Reserve did that on their own, and it was
With the help of the big banks.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, there we are again. We're gonna break up the corporatocracy by making them monopolies. That's exactly what happened. So they can paint a picture for society through language that sounds good, it looks good, but if you test their theories, they're false in all their premises.
And if you haven't been educated enough to think for yourself, then this language is going to sound artful and, compassionate and something that you may want to go down the road with. But once you test the theories, like you said, then you realize what it really means.
That's right.
And what they really intended.
Well, and so cluster B personalities do a good job of weaponizing empathy. Okay. And that's exactly how they bypass the cognitive functions of normal everyday people. And what we'll do is we'll weaponize empathy. We'll get to pull on your heartstrings. You should do more. You should do more. But hey, don't do it altruistically. We're the government. We're here to help. That's we'll do it.
And ironically, most of the people weaponizing empathy have none.
Mm-hmm. No, they have none. No, and that's the power of the narcissistic psychopath, right? They have no empathy, but they know how to use yours, and that's why they always have to be attached to a victim to abuse, because they usually attach themselves to an empath to abuse the empath. That's just how that works. I'm not going to go into detail there.
And
but
being
it
an
is
empath, I can say you have to be strong enough to protect your kindness.
Yep.
And that takes a lot of time and practice, but it can be done.
So no longer would freedom be defined simply as protection from or against the abusive powers of government. The central idea of classical liberalism. The philosopher Isaiah Berlin famously defined this as negative freedom. While FDR accepted the importance of protection from an overreaching government, he sought to create one that would provide positive freedoms as well. The second Bill of Rights. The key concept in the speech was security, protectionism. So we're going to identify three forms of socialism today. It starts off in protectionism, it moves to socialism, and then it ends in communism. Okay. Give me liberty or give me death. And the famous Bible quote is, Gary, do you know it? He who comes preaching security,
Oh,
safety.
we'll never have any.
The key concept in this speech was security, which FDR now expanded to include almost all areas of life essential to peace. The president insisted was a decent standard of living for all individual men and women and children in all nations. FDR and Great Issues in American History, Richard Hofstadter, John Patrick Diggins, The Proud Decades, America in War and Peace, 1941 to 1960.
Chicken in every pot, as Huey Long would say.
Yep. Now, so Woodrow Wilson, progressives, up to FDR, the name's liberal, right? We get to the 90s and they switch back to progressives. Progressives become liberal and return to progressives in the 20th century to simply shake the negative connotation. Now, this is the point of staunch language. You can have a moron, and I'm going to say he's a moron, like Bill Maher, get up there and claim he's a liberal, okay? Philosophically, he's a socialist, okay? He's a collectivist. And yet people all across this country will excuse his moronic and sophomoric logical deductions. And it's just time to end all this. When he's right, give him his right.
Right.
But when he's wrong, to even allow him to abuse the language or anyone else to abuse our language or control our dictionaries must be put to an end. And I'll give people the perfect example. If you have not listened to the oral arguments of Murphy versus Biden, it used to be Missouri versus Biden, and listen to Ketanji Jackson, okay? If you do not listen to Ketanji Jackson in the last 4 episodes that I have put out, including the live stream we did last week, and why I think it is of extreme importance to understand cultural Marxism, socialism, protectionism, and communism, and postmodernism. If you do not understand that these are all ideologies differing in degrees, but on the fundamental base level, they're all the same. And if you cannot hear this Supreme Court judge discuss the power of the state as an almighty, omniscient, omnipresent being.
Justice Jackson?
So my biggest concern is that your view has the First Amendment hamstringing the government in significant ways in the most important time periods. I mean, what would you have the government do? I've heard you say a couple times that the government can post its own speech, but in my hypothetical, kids, this is not safe, don't do it, is not going to get it done. And so I guess some might say that the government actually has a duty to take steps to protect the citizens of this country, and you seem to be suggesting that that duty cannot manifest itself in the government encouraging or even pressuring platforms to take down harmful information. So can you help me? Because I'm really worried about that, because you've got the First Amendment operating in an environment of threatening circumstances from the government's perspective, and you're saying that the government can't interact with the source of those problems.
Okay? And understand her philosophical viewpoint. You're not getting it. Okay? So that's why we're doing this series, because folks, we're here. There's two. Some people want to break it down in good versus evil, but it's nuanced in that. It's philosophical. It's philosophical, and this has been waged from time immemorial.
Yeah.
Language, the tool used to convey ideas from outward impressions of our natural world, is corrupted through false equivalence. The creation of rights to mean a living wage, fair housing, and education. It sounds great, folks, but this is false philanthropy, because there are no free lunches. There's always a cost associated with everything. And we should always ask ourselves one simple question: at what cost? But there's a cost to state interference, and the cost is always, my friends, legalized plunder. Okay? That's a fact.
And loss of rights of the individual.
That's right. The state must come in forcibly, physically compel, or coerce you to your theft of what you've earned from your labor, which is your individual right, your wages, and redistribute it. Okay, that's all it is. It's legalized plunder. Therefore, it is imperative that we use language, and we use it precisely, never conforming to social engineering tactics of protectionism, socialism, or communism. This is William Smith. All social engineering is preceded by verbal engineering. However, with the rise of postmodernism, standpoint epistemology, and obsession with individual expression, truth has been redefined to mean what an individual wants it to mean. It's completely subjective. However, with the rise of postmodernism, standpoint epistemology, and obsession with individual self-expression, truth has been redefined to mean what an individual wants it to mean. Truth is based on their subjective experience and how they view reality. Some academics go as far to argue that truth is a social construct. It has progressed to the point of absurdity. Okay, that's a fact. And what people are doing today, attorneys, judges, lawyers, politicians, academics, are they're arguing to win the argument instead of discerning for the truth. And the reason for that is because to them, in this warped ideology, where material facts don't exist, the only thing that matters is their individual thoughts, and that everything else must comply with their delusion. This is the epitome of psychosis. Okay?
The end justifies the means.
That's right. So we're just going to add a couple little Nietzsche and Foucault just to prove that what I'm talking about here is factual. If anybody does any research on Foucault, Alfred Kinsey, Sigmund Freud, and probably if we had enough information about the rest of these psychopaths, you would find that they were decrepit, degenerate individuals. Okay, Nietzsche, he argued that truth is impossible. There can only be perspective and interpretation driven by a person's interest or will to power against empiricism, which halts at observable phenomena. Let's say that again. Catch this, folks. Against empiricism, which halts at observable phenomenon. So don't trust the natural world and phenomenon and impressions, and come together and build a civil society based on those observations of the natural order of the world, that there is intelligence, there is a design, therefore there must be a designer. It's just that simple. Common sense. Okay. It doesn't take 140 IQ to do that logical deduction.
Yeah,
However,
I just recently saw the CIA release some stuff back in 2016 that I'm just seeing today, and they were basically proving that perception is reality. And if perception is reality, who's the perceiver?
Yeah.
They basically prove God.
Yeah. And so, and here's the thing about blind faith without being grounded in your natural world. Faith and zealotry is the only way that an individual will act in detriment to himself and others. A blind faith. Okay, it doesn't matter which degenerate lifestyle or art form or religion you go tie that to. They have to have that belief, that inner held conviction that moves them to act. Okay,
which is what we said last time is so dangerous. That
yeah,
if they're doing wrong, and they believe it as a faith, then they have the moral fortitude to continue down the path. And if they have any authority or power, everyone in their way is going to be harmed.
That's right. That's correct. So we move to Foucault in his book Nietzsche, Genealogy and History. Remember, folks, there's only degrees of separation. That's it. From each of these classifications, it doesn't matter if it's communism, cultural Marxism, socialism, protectionism, or postmodernism. The degrees are there, and they spend a lot of time writing a lot of books that mean absolutely nothing. I mean absolutely nothing. Okay. And unfortunately, I have wasted a lot of time reading this garbage in order to be able to sift through it and go, okay, these people are nut jobs. And however, our entire society is based upon Paulo Freire, Michel Foucault, and all these psychopaths. Okay. I just want to articulate what they say from their own mouth. I am simply a Nietzschean, and I try as far as possible on certain number of issues to see with the help of Nietzsche's text. Protectionism, socialism, and communism is built on the same premise of man, by man, for man. Remember, they reject God, so they reject the natural order. Just look, whether you're a theist or non-theist, it doesn't matter. Okay. What we have to accept is that the natural world does exist and there is natural phenomena here, and that all the questions have not been answered, and we have been intentionally led by our nose like a dog and shoveled heaps of shit. Excuse me for being so crude there, but that's what they've done. And just like the shirt I'm wearing today, they actually have made most of society believe that they're a monkey fish frog. Now, this is totally contrary to your entire reality, okay? But you walk around thinking that your ancestors actually once was a monkey fish frog. And it's completely absurd. And it takes so much social engineering in order to do it, right? But they've been able to infiltrate, subvert all that is good because this is their philosophical tenets. Okay, so let's go to a second quote from Michel Foucault, Nietzsche, Genealogy and History, just to impress upon everyone these illogical, unreasonable, and irrational ideas. All knowledge rests upon injustice. There is no right, not even in the act of knowing the truth or a foundation for truth. And the instinct for knowledge is malicious, something murderous, opposed to the happiness of mankind. One thing you'll notice in today's progressives and left wings, you'll notice that most of them are hideous creatures. And the ones that do have some beauty have these eyes that are hollowed out. They have no window to the soul. They actually hate everything good and beauty and wonderful about this earth. This is intellectual sophistry, and this has come to signify the deliberate use of fallacious reasoning, intellectual charlatanism, and moral unscrupulousness. They have no moral code. These are empty, hollow shells of people, cluster B type personalities, psychopaths, narcissists. This is a fact. Okay.
Void of empathy.
Yes. So, with that slight deviation from what we came here to talk about today, we must understand that grammar, rhetoric, and logic mean something. Our natural world means something. We must agree to what the words mean, how it confines us, right? Because therefore we're not on the same atmosphere if we're allowing the complete watering down of our language. Okay, so this is where we get into objectivity, rules, and procedure, the necessary elements, because man cannot be objective. This is why we have scientific methods, rules, and procedures, because the methods employed can be. There's no bias in a method if done correctly. Okay, and fact checked, peer reviewed, whatever. However, that whole system of peer review and everything else has gone out the window too, right? Because we've got peer reviewed papers out there claiming that a man can be turned into a woman and a woman can be turned into a man. But folks, this is unnatural. So we know it's false.
And so, what's your favorite dictionary of choice?
Webster's 1828 is my favorite dictionary.
And you can
And the
find that
reason-
online, right?
You can find the Webster's 1828 online. And the reason for that is because he still has it's not as deep as the actual hard cover book, which has the complete etymology of the words, but the online edition does do a little bit of etymology of the words, which helps because you can trace back how it was used over the course of millennia. Okay. And that's important. That's very important because civil society means in order to have a civil society, we must have rules and laws that apply generally to everyone. There's no anointed class of individuals, okay? Or people within the intelligentsia that can dictate, third parties dictate, who can dictate to others, right, what they must or must not do, and then pay no consequence for the decision and just walk away. This is madness. Okay? Apply that to COVID. Okay? Apply that to COVID-19. Okay, so objectivity, rules, and procedure. This is the classical liberal interpretation. So you have natural and grammatical meaning. The golden rule of all legal and lawful interpretation is the plain and or ordinary meaning of the words. And then we have what is called common parlance, which leads us to our litera, Greek, right? Literal rule of interpretation. In the context of legal interpretation, the grammatical rule of interpretation is one of the principles used to understand and interpret statute, laws, or legal documents. This rule suggests that the ordinary and natural meaning of the words in a statute should be given priority when interpreting the law. Rule is Dr. Graves saying, and in essence, he is correct. And in fact, in reality, he's correct. Because he is following the classical liberal logic and reasoning that facts are facts. And no matter our wishes, passions, or fears, facts exist. And as rational beings, we can logically deduce using our faculties and lead to reasonable inferences. Right?
And they're very stubborn things.
Yes, the facts are stubborn. So we'll go to the plain meaning rule of interpretation. The grammatical rule of interpretation emphasizes the importance of giving effect to the plain and ordinary meaning of the words used in the statute. This means that words should be understood in their usual sense unless there is a specific reason or context suggesting otherwise. We'll get to the context suggesting otherwise. I'm going to throw a little one in here today. We're going to get a little bit more complicated as we move forward, okay? In this series, we're going to get into judicial doctrines that should have never been created. The Hicks doctrine, the strict scrutiny, intermediate scrutiny, rational basis. All these doctrines created by the judicial branch are nothing more than ex post facto laws. Okay, that's it. That's all they are. It is the judiciary acting as the legislative branch of the United States. All right, so Section 2000E, this has direct implication on my daughter's case. However, that is in the appeal process now, where I have to logically tear apart the magistrate's opinion, which is completely and fundamentally opposed to the plain, ordinary meaning of the statute. Let's read this together. This is the statute. It shall be unlawful employment practice for an employer to fail or refuse to hire or to discharge any individual or otherwise to discriminate against any individual with respect to his compensation, terms, conditions, or privileges of employment because of such individual's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, or to limit, segregate, or classify his employees or applicants for employment in any way which would deprive or tend to deprive any individual of employment opportunities or otherwise adversely affect his status as an employee because of such individual's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Anybody who is consciously aware of what happened to COVID-19, individuals were isolated, segregated, and classified due to what? Mask status or vaccinated status. So right here, we're going to define religion. A lot of people think you need a religious exemption, that you must classify to one of the branches of Christianity or no, it's not the case. Let's define religion, and then we'll go through this. The constitutional mandate expresses a deliberate and considered judgment that religious matters are to be left to the conscience of the citizen, and declares as a basic postulate of the relation between the citizen and his government that the rights of conscience are in their nature of peculiar delicacy and will little bear the gentlest touch of governmental hand. Okay, and y'all can read that. Freedom of conscience, right under C, also ID at 217.18. Freedom of conscience and freedom to adhere to such religious organization or form of worship as the individual may choose cannot be restricted by law. So you see there's a separation there from freedom of conscience, the ability to choose right or wrong. Okay, we're going to go a little bit deeper.
And this might be a good place for you to talk about religion versus religious.
Well, right. So religion. So the separation of church and state, which is religion, right? Religion is an institution organized. So religious is peculiar, unique to the individual. Does not have to be classified anywhere. Okay. This allows the individual to say, I want to pray to a God. I don't pray to a God, whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't classify you in one class where we can segregate you from society. And it must be reasonable. So what they did here was quite powerful in that the religious exemption that people most applied for was, say, you're a practicing Jew and a Torah Jew, and you want it off on Saturdays. Well, that's a religious exemption. You'd write that out. That's something applying for. You might be Christian and have to have Easter off or Good Friday. That's a religious exemption. Putting an investigational experimental drug into your body that you can never extract is not necessary for a religious exemption.
Are you sure?
I am positive. However, the moment that anyone said no, it was an expression of their conscience, which is an exercise of the free exercise clause, was at the very least designed to guarantee freedom of conscience by preventing any degree of compulsion in matters of belief.
Which is the right to think and act
independently,
differently than anyone else.
Yes, think and act independently of anyone else. Arguing that the principal interest protected by the free exercise clause is the individual's interest and not being forced to violate the compelling requirements of, well, what is conscience? Okay. Internal or self-knowledge or judgment of right and wrong, or the faculty, power or principle within us, which decides on the lawfulness or unlawfulness of our own actions and affections, and instantly approves or condemns them. Conscience is called by some writers the moral sense and considered as an original faculty of our nature. Webster's 1828. That is why I love Webster's 1828. Okay, folks, if you don't have a Webster's 1828, I would advise getting it. Okay, so let's go back up. I'm going to scroll back up to the law. Okay, as written, plain ordinary meaning. We know what freedom of conscience and religion is now. Two totally different ideas. It shall be unlawful. Shall. It's not a question of maybe. Okay. Unlawful employment practice for an employer to fail or refuse to hire or to discharge any individual or otherwise to discriminate. This is going to get a little bit deeper as we go through the EUA statutes. Okay, that's going to be later on down the line, because there was no legal or lawful authority granted to anyone to forcibly mask or vaccinate anyone in this country. There's no statutory authority for it. Everything was designated, even masks, under EUA authority. However, let's say it was an approved drug. Let's just say, hypothetically say that. Did they have the power and authority to violate the due process of the individual? Nope. Not in our system of law, but they did it anyway. And what you're watching is millions of Ketanji Jacksons who have infiltrated and subverted our government and have completely perverted our individualistic system to put into place their collectivist system, and who write laws exempting themselves, by the way.
And shielding themselves from liability.
That's right. But you, the peasant, you're expendable. And this is why we have a limitation set on government. Okay. However, let's continue on. We get back down here. So what did it say versus Rockin versus California? I guess it may be Rokin, right? I don't know. Either way, in 1952 was a case decided by the Supreme Court of the United States that added behavior that shocks into test of what violates due process clause of the 14th Amendment. This is just something for y'all to put in your mind. To shock the conscience is a phrase that can refer to any situation that seems grossly unjust to the observer. Okay, well, somebody claiming complete ownership and interest in my body seems like a completely grossly unjust execution of authority.
It shocks the conscience.
This shocks my conscience. Okay. So we've started down the path of objectivity, using deductive reasoning, defining our words, and seeing the fallacy of the social engineers who would have us disbelieve the evidence of our eyes and ears and disown our faculties of logic and reason and join them in unreality. We can't do that. No. We're going to go through a few more of the just grammatical rules of interpretation. We have the fixed meaning canon. Words must be given the meaning they had when the text was adopted. Now, this is important. What do you think the words that are being adopted today inside Congress in a bill could mean? It could mean anything. You go to Merriam's dictionary today, they might have 100 definitions for one word, right? And it's intentional. Remember, all social engineering begins with the engineering of language. That's where it begins.
Of language.
General terms canon.
And before you go there, explain to everybody what a canon is.
So a canon's a rule. Well, hell, let's pull it up, right? Let's give Webster a shot at this. Nope, let's not do ecclesiastical. That's another beautiful thing about him. He separates figurative and literal language in his definitions. So a canon is a law or rule in general. So when we say a canon, a legal interpretation, every judge is supposed to apply these rules to any statutory interpretation. And for us Americans, we have Scalia to thank for bringing this back to our remembrance. He put them all together, compiled a book. It's called Reading the Law, A Matter of Interpretation, where the everyday Johnny could get his hands on an originalist and textualist view instead of purposivism. Okay? And that's judicial activism. That's where they can put whatever they want into the text. Did it, though, getting you like that? You got to cut it anyway because you laughed. Purposivism. General, I went for it, Gary. Went out there and tried to get it. All right. So we move on to the next canon of interpretation. General terms. General terms are to be given their general meaning. That's simple, right? This is very simple. This isn't complex. We have the conjunctive disjunctive canon. Most Americans don't know this, right? And joins a conjunctive list or a disjunctive list. But with negatives, plurals, and various specific wordings, there are nuances, okay? The gender number canon. Did y'all know this? Did you know that he already incorporates the she? It's a rule of grammatical interpretation. How many people really think that the pronoun thing is that big of a deal where now we have attorneys going out and writing he, she, they, them in legal works? Oh my God, get out of here, you buffoons.
And this is I don't know if it's unique to English, but as you go to Spanish and Italian and French, and they all have feminine and masculine words. So the one pronoun doesn't include the masculine and feminine, but here in English, it absolutely does.
Yep. In the absence of a contrary indication, the masculine includes the feminine and vice versa. And the singular includes the plural and vice versa. What do you think all these pronoun freaks would do if they learned that this was a rule of grammatical? They'd have nothing to be offended about.
Get your learned dictionary out of here.
Yeah, and they'd want to beat me out too. So presumption of non-exclusive include. The verb to include introduces examples, not an exhaustive list. We're going to go through that canon a little bit deep, folks, okay? I'm just introducing you to some of them. This isn't all of them. Let's do Title 26, IRS Code 7701, and define person. Okay, there's a couple clues here that we need to key in on. First, we've got quotation marks around person. Okay, you'll notice that the government does this a lot in a lot of their bills. Something so simple as a backward slash can separate the artificial person from the natural person. These are crafty people. Okay, very crafty. One, the definition of person, according to Title 26, the IRS Code, the term person shall be construed. It's a key word there. Okay, to mean and include an individual, a trust, a state, partnership, association, company, or a corporation. And they don't use the Oxford comma, by the way. Just saying. Here we go to the IRS government website. There's one thing in here. There's one definition in here that is not associated with the rest of the terms unless what you presume that term to mean is contrary to what it actually means. Most people are going to read the IRS code, including lawyers and judges, and going to go, that's the natural person. It's an individual. No, it can't be by the rules of interpretation. Okay? It cannot be. And I'll prove that. Here we'll go to the IRS website, and we'll define by the IRS website the general rule. The general rule is that an individual is an independent contractor. Okay, so if you're an independent contractor, you're what's called a sole proprietorship. You have asked the state to create some legal entity in some form or fashion, and that's how you're working. Whether it's an LLC, any myriad of different options. Okay, in that case, you are an individual, a trust, an estate. You're not a partnership. You're not an association, but you could be a company or you could be a corporation. The general rule is that an individual is an independent contractor if the payer has the right to control or direct only the result of the work. Now, that's a key part right there, because in our individualistic system, the right to your wages and your labor, no one else has.
It's defined as your property.
That's right. Or direct only the result of the work and not what will be done and how it will be done. So the whole text canon, the text must be construed as a, okay. Construe. And we'll go back up, right? Let's just go back up. We'll see this shall be what? Construed. Okay. Construe means to arrange words in their natural order. Hold up. We've got a list of words here. They've got to have a natural order. You can't go natural person, artificial person, and move forward through a completely artificial construct. To reduce from a transposed to a natural order, so as to discover the sense of a sentence, hence to interpret. Webster's 1828. So we get into the Latin Occitor Associus, associated words canon. And somebody out there with good Latin skills, don't beat me down. I'm sorry. I'm a country boy from Louisiana, okay? Associated words bear on one another's meaning. So you've got a list, okay? The words must be associated in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Ejusdem generis canon, where general words follow an enumeration of two or more things. They apply only to persons or things of the same general kind or class specifically mentioned. Ejusdem generis. We'll see this in the next episode. We're going to break down the Health Defense Fund and their ruling that they got against the CDC and where the judge got it correct using the rules of interpretation, saying that sanitation did not grant the CDC direct ownership or interest in everybody flying on airplanes to sanitize the people, because that's what the lawyer said. That's what the government said, is that a regulatory agency meant to operate in commerce all of a sudden had direct control and authority to bypass due process and sanitize people. I guess they'll be showing up at your house to scrub your butt later.
Right.
I mean, come on.
So what they essentially did was try to redefine the word sanitize so that they could have interest in everyone's property.
Well,
And
also,
thank goodness someone said no.
Well, also, remember that since 1984, we've allowed them to do this because the judicial branch created the Chevron doctrine, okay, which is another legislative ex post facto law that, my God, they get to interpret their own statutes.
Deference, the Chevron deference.
Yeah, Chevron deference. That's
which
right.
is currently pending before the Supreme Court.
Oh, God, I can't wait to see it go. There's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth. You hear me?
Fact. That's a fact.
Weeping. They're going to cry foul. Okay. So, folks, we've reached the end of this lesson because I don't want to pack too much or overload. Words have meaning. And as we move forward in this study group, it is imperative that we become originalists and textualists so we can effectively fight against subjectivism in all its forms, machinations, and socially constructed identities. Whether protectionism, socialism, or communism, they are only different in degrees, never in principle. Thank you for coming today. I hope this study edifies each and every one of you, and we'll see you next week.
Leave any comments for suggestions and whatnot in the comment section below. Thank you again. We'll see you soon.